All right, thanks everybody for coming. Welcome. If you don't know me, I'm Sophie Lavoie. I'm a professor at the Gender and Women's Studies program here at UNB and a professor in Culture and Media Studies also at UNB. I just want to acknowledge that the territory that we gather on is governed by the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1725 that were signed and did not include the ceding of the land. So when I do these territorial acknowledgements, I always ask people to reflect on the meaning of the territorial acknowledgements with respect to the reason why we're gathering here today. So we're gathering for the Feminist Lunch, as we can think of gendered issues with regards to the territories that we're located on. Our Feminist Lunch is organized by the UNB STU University Women's Center, the UNB Gender and Women's Studies program, UNB Libraries, which generously lends us the space, and the Women's Alumnae Association at UNB that's generously paying for snacks this year for the first time since we've been running this series, which is very exciting. Today we're extending a very warm welcome to Dr. Tracy Glynn. Dr. Glynn is the National Director of Operations and Projects for the Canadian Health Coalition. She also holds a teaching appointment in the Environment and Society program at St. Thomas University and at the School of Social Work at St. Thomas University. And she also teaches courses for the University of New Brunswick and in the Department of Sociology at St. Thomas University. She's involved in a lot of local social justice organizations, so you might have seen her face before at protests and things like that in Fredericton. And she's co-author of the book Great Trees in New Brunswick, that I think is in this like second or third edition already. Second edition, which is amazing. This afternoon, Dr. Glynn is going to give us a talk entitled Seeing Empathy as Resistance, a conjunctural photo voice study of women and mining in Indonesia. And I know that Dr. Glynn has been to Indonesia a number of times, so she has this very special insights into the topic. Dr. Glynn's talk is going to last about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for a Q&A. So welcome, Dr. Glynn.
So first, thank you to Sophie Lavoie and the Feminist Lunch Series for having me. I also want to thank Dr. Lavoie for lifting up the work of her colleagues. She does that through this series as well as other ways, and so I wanted to extend my appreciation for that. Some of you have. The microphone is not. Should I put it on? Just put it on. Okay. Is that good? Okay. Okay. So I know a couple of you have heard a version of this talk before, but I have mixed it up a bit. So this is Peggy. So she was in many ways my research assistant in 2013 when I first conceived of this research. She was really shy, like I was at her age, 14, and I think we maybe bonded over that. So she followed me from house to house as I interviewed women in her community. And she asked me about going to Canada, and I dreamed about her coming to Canada for university maybe, but then thought how difficult that would be because I knew that girls in her Karantsidangi community often don't finish high school. So the last time I saw her, she came to send me off at the bus station, and she was wearing the most wonderful turquoise jelly sandals that she had just gotten for the new school year. A few months later, she was killed on her way to school in a motorcycle accident. Her mother, Mary, was a participant in our photo voice study, and she used that platform to tell that tragic story and to advocate for safe school transportation for the Karantsidangi kids, a promise that she said the mining company had made. So in Sorako, like in many mining towns, who's in charge and who's responsible for social services is often blurred, but it's clear who's in control and who's benefiting from the resource extraction that's happening. So her mother asked me to never forget Peggy, and I feel compelled, to share her beautiful face with all of you. She would have been 24 years old this year. So today, I want to share with you some key findings from my doctoral studies, as well as where that research is now taking me. I was just in Indonesia in October for a conference, but I've been going back and forth there for over the years. So I'm going to talk about where it's taking me today, specifically how my research is informing gender just solutions to climate change. So the transition to a future low carbon economy is linked to an explosion in the extraction of rare earth metals, as well as other metals that we've been mining for a long time, like nickel and bauxite. It's also linked to the mining in former no-go zones, like in the sea, in protected areas. So such so-called green extractivism, involves the expansion of new resource frontiers that has many worried about the reproduction of historical patterns of accumulation and dispossession seen in zones of resource extraction. So we are seeing so-called green strategies creating new resource dependencies and environmental inequalities based on the impositions of certain notions of progress and development. So the growing demand for greener products like electric vehicles has also led to new dynamics in global supply chains, with countries in the global north, notably on Indigenous territories, for example in the Ring of Fire region in Northern Ontario, emerging as suppliers of the transition metals. So we have the Globe and Mail, I think just this week, publishing this series of called, Mission Critical, that's talking about how Canada is losing out in the critical minerals race. I wish this series was a little bit more critical, so just going on. So in Indonesia, I firmly believe that there are lessons to be learned. So to meet the demand of nickel for electric vehicle batteries, there has been an explosion of nickel mining. And so my research for the past 20 years has been at one nickel mine and smelter site it's a long-established site. But now, in a very short amount of time, there has been this explosion of nickel mines and smelters on the island where I do my research. So as part of the global energy transition, a new resource frontier has emerged in Indonesia in the rush to replace fossil fuels with cleaner forms of energy, so-called cleaner forms of energy. So the electrification of society as a climate solution has justified an acceleration in the establishment of these nickel mines and smelters on the Indonesian islands of Sulawesi, where I do my research, as well as next door on the island of Maluku. So the extraction and smelting of nickel in high demand by global manufacturers of electric vehicles is displacing island agriculture and fisheries. Meanwhile, Indonesia's coal barons continue to increase coal production for export and also for domestic use, often to power the nickel plants. So using the cloak of climate action, Indonesia is mining nickel to put more electric vehicles on the roads in other countries, while edging closer to being the world's leading coal exporter. So today I'll be speaking about my research on the gendered nature of everyday resistance to mining in Indonesia and what it can tell us for gender just transitions to a post-carbon future. So some of you have already heard a version of this talk, and I promise that I have mixed up a bit. This talk actually gave me an opportunity to share other photo stories. I think I've gotten a little bit lazy. I've been sharing the same photo stories over and over again. But the women in our photo voice study produced 75 photo stories, each story with so much to tell. I want to begin with a very quick and dirty, I guess, history or a discussion of the historical and current political social context surrounding gender mining and resistance in Sorako, Indonesia. So just maybe going back to this slide, yeah. So Soraco's there, located on that orchid-shaped island of Sulawesi. And just east of that island is the Indonesia, Borneo, Kalimantan, where I've been doing some research in the coal fields there with women and gender minorities, activists who are resisting coal mining and are also climate activists. So then I'm going to just give you a little bit of historical context, and then talk about how we did our photo voice study and the contributions of that, and what it has to tell us for a post-carbon future. My research really began with this woman, Rima Mananta. So in the year 2000, Rima quit her job in a city near her ancestral home to join a struggle to reclaim her Karansedangi community's land. So that was on the outskirts of the mining town of Soraco. So it was a struggle that took her to Jakarta, Indonesia's capital, to other places in Southeast Asia to organize with women that were also resisting resource extraction. It took her to Canada. At the time, in 2006, there was a lot of work being done on a bill C-300, that attempted to hold Canadian mining companies to account for their crimes committed abroad. So Rima came and spoke to MPs. She also came here to Fredericton. So on the right there, she's presenting in Joe McFarlane and John McIndy, the late John McIndy, and Kathy Holtman's class. So that was in 2006. And on the and then you see her here also protesting on the streets for her community. So at the turn of the millennium, there were these cursory accounts that spoke of Karansedangi women, such as Rima, squatting on the land, partaking in hunger strikes, like Juliana here in the middle. She's occupying the what was then the INCO office in the capital of her province, and she was joined by students in that hunger strike. So we were seeing the Karansedangi women protesting in very visible ways, public ways, but we were not seeing that with the neighboring Soraco women. They seemed to be acquiescing to mining by their lack of public protest, but as a longtime ally with Indigenous organizations in both communities, I suspected more to the story of women's resistance to mining in Soraco, so that then became the topic of my PhD studies. So I knew that Karansedangi and Soraco farmers were engaged in a decades-long struggle for fair land compensation and employment at the smelter. I had also studied the environmental and health impacts of the mine and smelter as part of my master's degree. But I did not know about other struggles, what could be called the indirect social impacts of mining, until I carried out the photo voice study with the women. Furthermore, I had yet to see people who benefit more from mining exercising empathy and solidarity towards those more adversely affected by mining. So I began my research with a Gramscian approach of examining how pivotal historical processes and social relations have converged to shape the politics of everyday life and resistance to mining in Soraco. So rural and Indigenous women across the world are among those occupying the front lines of collective resistance against resource extraction. We can think of some of these women closer to home, like Annie Claire here on the left, and Suzanne Patlas, Mi'kmaq women who have been arrested for their acts of resistance to fracking for shale gas. That was 10 years ago now. Or the late LaDonna Brave Bull Allard, who was the face of resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline at Standing Rock. So the literature on women mining resistance tells us that in some cases, women play with their identities and how society expects them to act, while also upsetting gender norms to defend their land, livelihoods, and cultures from mining, including in hostile environments. Interests invested in resource extraction stand accused of causing or being complicit in acts of gender-based violence, despite prevailing gender relations that hinder women's participation in economic and in political life. Rural women do resist resource extraction in both open and in hidden ways. So my research is contributing to that. And focuses on the everyday resistance of women from the two different Indigenous communities in Sorako. So the Karansi-Dangi and the Sorako women belong to various ethnicities and religions, and they speak different languages. There's many in the Sorako region, people belong to different ethnic groups. They also have unique histories and relationships to the land and mining. And I also want to note too that, being an open dissident to mining and a woman against resource extraction in Indonesia is not without risk. And so someone that we draw or that we've used or that we're in conversation with in our work is the work of James C. Scott on everyday resistance. So he drew our attention to how people in risky environments resist their oppression through acts of everyday resistance. So Scott argued that people challenge their subjugation in hidden ways in situations where open rebellion would be too risky. The literature on gender and everyday resistance shows that women do not accept their unequal positions despite their lack of overt action against subordination. Instead, as Agarwal and others have shown, they act in strategic ways to lessen their subjugation and to win gains. So something that has been noted and that I've observed in being part of different movements, not just in Indonesia, is that oftentimes these oppositional movements are male-dominated and also marginalized spaces for women where men's voices are heard more in organizing meetings, and sometimes women are just not welcome. So despite the barriers for participation, women across the world are counted among the most formidable opponents to mining, occupying front lines of visible resistance while also secretly partaking in organizing meetings, for example. So much of the global resistance to mining is directed at Canadian mining companies, and that's actually why I became interested in that case study, was because at the time it was owned by a Canadian mining company, Inco. Canada is home to today about half of the world's publicly listed mining and exploration companies. And like I said, I became interested in studying Sorako because a Canadian mine operated there, and people there, when they found out I was Canadian, asked me to do something about it. So Paula Butler and others have noted that mining companies have justified their investments by regurgitating colonial narratives that outside forces such as a mining company are needed to bring modernity, development, prosperity, even democracy to economically backward regions of the world. So Butler was actually surprised by this, but she interviewed 150 mining executives that had operations in African countries, and it's found in this book here, Colonial Extractions, her findings. And she said that, she was surprised by these colonial discourses that they were using. She thought that they would be more sophisticated in justifying, I guess, what they were doing. But she said that she was hearing, these colonial narratives. So as theorized by Escobar and others, neo-colonial powers have replaced old forms of settler colonialism, direct rule, by evoking and putting into practice projects of modernization and development, such as mining, to control newly independent nations, such as in Indonesia. So to understand mining in the Sorako region of Indonesia and resistance to mining, it's important to examine Indonesia's recent history. So the Dutch occupied Indonesia from the late 16th century to 1945. In the last few years it was occupied by Japan. It wasn't until the early 20th century, though, that the Dutch established an office in Sorako, where the nickel mine and smelter is, and when it did, it began dictating the movements of Sorako's shifting cultivators and foragers of forest products, forcing them to grow rice and to live in certain boundaries. And then in 1945, Indonesia won independence. Indonesia's first president, Sukarno, on the left here, was critical of imperialism, and he was a leader of the non-aligned movement. He famously told the U.S. to go to hell, so during Sukarno's early years as president, he not only dealt with outside forces that were attempting to interfere, there was also an inside armed urgency that was attempting to achieve an Islamic state. And so that was known as Darul Islam, and it spread in pockets of Indonesia, and one of those areas where it went was the Sorako region. In the 1950s, the Kransidongi people, then predominantly Protestant, were forced to flee. They were either forced to convert or they were forced to flee when the militants came to their area. So according to the Kransidongi elders that I've interviewed, while their community was gone, Inco, majority owned by its parent company, Inco, it's also was called Inco in Indonesia. While the community was gone, the mining company mined their lands, took part of their community's graveyard to house its workers, turned their fruit tree groves into an exclusive golf course where only the mining company executives could play golf. So Sukarno's administration was seen as a threat by Western imperialist forces. Such forces backed Indonesian Army General Suharto, seen on the right in that photo in the middle. So they backed his military campaign to eradicate communism in the country. It was an operation that killed as many as 1.5 million people in 1 year, in 1965 to 1966. So then a military coup removed Sukarno from power and installed General Suharto as president in 1967. And Suharto swiftly moved then to pass legislation that gave foreign investors access to the country's rich natural resources. He did retain some state ownership in mining and negotiated joint mining ventures with the multinational companies. So the second multinational company that Indonesia signed a joint venture with was with Inco Limited of Canada in 1968. So in the 1970s, Inco began acquiring land of Sorako farmers to explore mine nickel. The locals decried the outsiders benefiting more from the mining in terms of access to wage labor, to social services, and this is all documented in Catherine Robinson's excellent anthropological work on the area at the time in the 70s and 80s. The title of her book, Stepchildren of Progress, comes from someone she interviewed who said that the people of Sorako feel like the stepchildren of progress. So the forced displacement of Sorako and Kransidongi people from their lands has resulted in local opposition that has continued to this day. The dissent has been tamed by Indonesia's use of military forces to protect the investments, as well as by the economic dependency created by the mining project. So despite the repression, dependency, and exploitation, people in Sorako, mostly men, periodically protest the mining company over unfair land when they are booted off their land for the expansion of the mine, and they also protest for failing to hire locals at the smelter. So when I began visiting Sorako in the year 2001, there was a military checkpoint that stopped vehicles entering the community, and it was sometimes staffed by Indonesia's Brimob that was notorious for committing human rights violations and denounced by human rights groups. That checkpoint no longer exists, but community members say other acts of intimidation are committed by the authorities. So that's, yeah, sorry, that's a photo there of the Brie mob. So before the mine and smelter were established, both women and men were cultivators of rice. As hills were stripped for nickel, men gained almost exclusive access to wage labor at the mine and smelter, making women increasingly economically dependent on men. Households with male miners earning low wages also depended on the unpaid labor of women in the household and women's labor on farms and what they sold at the markets. Initially, women were shut out of the mining jobs. Today, there are more women working at the mine and smelter. But back over the years, women have had to find other alternative incomes. Many women migrated to the mining town and became sex workers. Other women became known as contract wives, so those who married men who came to Sorako to work and then were abandoned by their husbands when the work contract was over and the men left. The mining industry, has encouraged and has benefited from a working class that is divided along lines of gender and race. So despite the divisions and subordination, women from the Sorako region have found ways to persist, and so has the mining industry. I'm just going to go on because I want to get to the actual photo voice study, but I just wanted to give you some context this case study. So here is a photo of the Kransidangi settlement. So in the year 2000, when Suharto was removed from power, there was student protests, and he finally left, was no longer the president, and there were windows of political freedom open, and the Kransidangi people felt that it was safe to return to their land, so they did, and they began establishing these huts that you see in this photo. They would found materials, and so they often left their jobs in nearby cities in this effort to reclaim their land and in order to protect their community and their language, and they felt that they had to do that. They had to go back to the land to do that. And so, here you see another photo. So today there are, it's about 54 of these homes that are on abandoned mining land. So this land has been mined already. And the communities, it's been a long struggle to demand electricity and other services, and to get drinking water too. So like I said earlier, in 2013, we chatted with some folks in the community about this photo voice idea. I think I had first heard about it at a feminist geography conference in Ottawa, maybe the year before. So we introduced this photo voice idea to women in the community as a way to study the gender nature of resistance to mining. So photo voice, if you've not heard of it, is a participatory action research method that combines feminist inquiry with visual ethnography. It's a method that answers research questions through prompts and storytelling. So in our study, participants were asked to tell us about their lives with mining, to start with that big question. So photo voice participants, they share perspectives and memories and emotions, aspirations through photo storytelling. It's also an effective method for revealing hidden or taken for granted notions about structural ideological forces that affect our lives, and the method has been systematized by Carolyn Wang as well as Marianne Burris in their studies. They looked at the health of rural women in China. So while the photo voice method is it's also, it's celebrated for being an adaptable method. The basic steps include recruiting participants, planning the project with participants, training the participants on different things like how to take photographs safely, and going through all the steps of photo voice. Then participants go out and take photos, and they come back and tell stories using their photos. And then there's a discussion about how to share or use those photos. Oftentimes participants want to do exhibitions of their photo stories, and then a debrief follow-up. Usually photo voice projects continue, maybe in a different form, as participants decide what to do next. So these are just some of the photo stories that our study produced. The World Women's March that happened, was that in 2015? Or I think that's 2015. And we did the exhibition at the Wilmot Church downtown. So before setting out to conduct the Photo Voice project with the women, I did discuss the participatory nature of Photo Voice and also the benefits and the limitations, as well as my own positionality as an ally of their community organizations and as a university-based researcher, so that everybody, some of the women knew me, but many of them didn't know me and didn't know my connections to their organization, so it was of course important to talk about that. And also I was able to conduct the research in Bahasa, Indonesia, which I think is important because I was able to communicate more effectively with the participants and also to make more enriched observations. So mindful too of Shireen Razek's politics of accountability, I made sure to openly discuss my positions and how each of us stood to benefit from the research. So there were definitely things like, I could have focused on finishing my dissertation, but instead I was focused on getting these photo stories out there. But I still had to have these conversations with people about how this work, this project that we were doing together was also benefiting me and my university career. So while community members expressed their feeling of having a stake in the project, I also knew that I was taking up their time, taking them away from their families and work, and didn't want to be a burden. So I and the participants designed this month-long Photo Voice project with all these considerations in mind. So 14 women, so 7 from each community, agreed to participate in the project. Wang and Burris do suggest 7 to 10 as the ideal photo voice number, participant number for Photo Voice projects. So a group of this size can, it allows for each participant to share various experiences and perspectives in meaningful ways. So with the assistance of a photojournalist, we facilitated a 3-hour Photo Voice training session with the participants before they set out to take photos. So that training included more information about Photo Voice, how to tell stories through photos, how to take photos ethically and safely. So they were, like I said earlier, the prompt was really just to tell us about your life with this mining operation in your backyard. And so after the first photo storytelling session, we were able to see that some of the photos could be grouped as strengths of the community. Others were about challenges that the women were facing in the community, or they were either facing or were just challenges for the community. And then others were about hopes or aspirations for the community. And some of the photo stories could be categorized under more than one of those. So then that guided them in their next photo taking session. So they set out to find, maybe they set out to find more of the challenges or more of the hopes. And so we did 3 of those photo taking storytelling sessions. And so my role as the researcher was really as a facilitator, just to create a space for discussion and to project their photos on the screen so that they could to facilitate that storytelling, and to do things like print the photo voice participants' photos so that they could keep them, and also to record their stories. So at the end of the project, they produced 75 photo stories. So each participant produced about 5 photo stories each. So besides the photo stories, we also collected data from 26 interviews, and also from participant observations. And we also brought the women together from the 2 communities to do this conjunctual exercise aimed at historically contextualizing the moments captured in their photo stories. And in this way we innovated the method, and we argue this in an article that was published. I should have mentioned Siti Maimuna's name before now, but she's my co-researcher in Indonesia. So Mai and I have published this paper in the Feminist Geography Journal, Gender, Place, Culture, where we argue this, we call on photo voice practitioners to do this conjunctual exercise, because it did enrich our findings, and we are really here drawing on the work of Deborah Barnt. So some of you may know her. She's a Canadian scholar, activist scholar who has done work in this area. She calls on us to name the moment. And through this conjunctural analysis, it endeavors to be able to understand subjectivity and agency and actions in particular situations and contexts. It also, as Barnt argues, it allows us to engage in ongoing reflection, and then that way it facilitates more informed action, and then further reflection and action as the historical moment continues to change. So what we did, to prepare for this exercise, we asked the participants in the second photo storytelling session to think about, first we gave them, a timeline of important political, social events that happened in their community. So like when they were displaced, say for the mining operation, or when the smelter opened, or when there was maybe significant social movement activity or that, and we asked the participants to reflect on this history to prepare for this convergence, and we also asked the participants to deliberate on defining moments in their lives, to think about the specific circumstances or events when they thought of their lives or their conditions in a new way. Then at this convergence, we reproduced the timeline where we made this timeline. We put these events on cards, and we put them around the room, and the photo voice participants then put their photo stories along this timeline, and we all went around the timeline and discussed why they put that photo story on that date. So maybe I want to get to the photo stories, but just this is, how am I doing on time? I meant to start the timer, sorry.
Probably another 5 minutes.
Okay, we'll get to the photo stories because that's more interesting. This is how I analyze the data, but drawing on the work of DeCillis, who did a really great dissertation on photo voice and sex workers in Oregon. And so, this is just how we sort of came up with the common themes, but I can go on. If you have questions about that, I can answer that later. But I did want to get to the photo stories. So, so we observed the Kransi-Dangi and Soraka women's photo stories clashing with the stories that the mining company was also telling. So, and we changed all the names of the women to protect them. So Kayla from the Kransi-Dangi community, so she, when you look at this photo, it looks very pleasant, but when you read the story, it tells you a story of dispossession. So she says, these trees are a testimony that the Kransi-Dangi people were here. No one can say that the Kransi-Dangi people were not here. These durian, mango, orange, and dengan trees were planted by the Kransi-Dangi people 70 years ago. Now our land and our trees are Valley's golf course. Then with just going on, so one of the things, the mining company often talks about all the positive things that they do for a community, but what was clear is that not everybody in the community is benefiting in the same way. Sorry, I meant to put Melania's name there, but from the Kransidongi community. So she shared, she said that this is my mother and my child. My parents are from Ambon and they came to Sorako 17 years ago. They came looking to make money because they heard about the Inco mine here. My mother used to wash clothes for an Inco worker, but now she can't see, so she can't work. She had to pay for a cataract operation and for the medicine. This is my mother's house on top of Lake Montano. My parents came to Sorako because it was said that Sorako was a place to achieve your dreams, but really life has been hard in Sorako. It's not been like a dream. My mother has no access to healthcare. So just getting to, I'm just going to skip through to another slide that shows, I think, getting to the point, my point of seeing empathy and solidarity. So Zaskia from the Kransidongi community, this was one of the photo stories that really moved the other participants, some to tears when she shared it with her Sorako neighbors. So she said mostly women in the Vale dump, and I should have said earlier, Vale, the Brazilian multinational giant, took over Inco in 2006. So she says, so mostly women work in the Valley dump. I have it better than my friend. She's a young widow who has 5 small children. She often looks for rice that it's been dumped by Valley households. She recooks the rice and turns it into a porridge. Sometimes we get fish and we wash it and cook it again. This is a hard way to make a living, but it's better than stealing or begging. We must go there before the dump trucks come. If not, we must scramble away with the cows. So here we see, so the women quietly resisting the taking of their land under the nose of the authorities, so narrowly avoiding arrest every morning they go to be able to get a little bit of income from the dump So just, on the surface, Sorako women appear to be more supportive of mining, but this Photo Voice project allowed women a safe space to be able to talk about the struggles that they see occurring with their neighbors. So Baina shared, this is a dump that's hidden in the forest above Boomper where Kransidongi families have settled. The garbage largely comes from the mine's contractors, and some of it comes from homes. Many contractors with the mining operation dump there are negative impacts from this activity, and no one is being held responsible for it. It's destroying the forest. When it rains, garbage and dangerous chemicals from the dump flow to the lake. It stinks and ruins the air. Water gathers here, and it becomes a place for mosquitoes to breed, which can cause sicknesses like dengue fever. So just going on, one more photo story, I think, yes. So Juanina from Sorako, so a number of women talked about the strengths of the women in their community, especially like the widows. So Lena shares here, she says, this is the strength of the Desa Nickel women. Even though this woman is without a husband, she's able to grow crops on her land. Rice is harvested twice a year. Farmers here only have rights to use the land. They're not allowed to own the land. They can only use and manage it. The land has been part of Valley's nickel mining area for years. So just getting to some of our, we argue that, that empathy, is a form of resistance to capitalism and to extractivism. Capitalism produces entrepreneurial subjects who must calculate their economic self-interests. And so when we act in compassionate ways towards other humans or life forms, it is a subversive act under capitalist social relations, since it does trouble the self-maximizing entrepreneurial human and the commodification of land and labor. And empathy is a potent force against, these hegemonic structures, since it does disrupt norms and simplistic narratives that serve domination and oppression. So here we're drawing on the work by Dreyer on empathy. We did feel that the Conjunctural Photo Voice project has more of a transformative potential. If you read Photo Voice studies, you see this a lot about how it talks about the transformative potential of it. we found, by doing this conjunctural exercise, that it did allow for the expression of empathy and solidarity. While it may not lead to more organized resistance, it did allow that space, to deliberate on oppressive social and economic ideological forces at play that affect our lives. And I think, like I said earlier, it's important because of the explosion that we're seeing of nickel mining in this area. At the same time, Indonesia's mining more coal. So we're also, what we're doing right now too is working with, or I guess taking up the call of Kuntala Lahiri, who's one of the scholars, probably the foremost scholar on gender and mining, who calls on us to not just, look at, the words that she uses, looking at a gender transformative post-coal future for just transition. And I think, sorry, I went way over time, but these are some of our emerging research questions. And just maybe I'll just skip to quickly, this is Sarah. So Sarah is one of, actually, she hopefully will be a PhD student soon, and so she's from the coal mining community of Samarinda, and right now we're working together on this topic. So looking at how the energy transition can be gender just and gender transformative, following Kuntala Lahiri Dut's call to ensure that the transition results in not just and change gender relations and social outcomes that benefit all people. Thank you for listening.